Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. Keep your relationship fueled up with strategies discovered by couples and experts. Because at Fuel Collective, we believe better relationships will equal a better world. You are about to discover specific insights and tools that cost little or nothing to implement to help you date forever. And now, here are your hosts, a couple who always have a half-packed suitcase and a date night in the calendar, Sammy and Nathan Yeager.
Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting about the do's and don'ts of dealing with conflict in your relationship, the key pillars to a relationship that if broken can lead to separation, and how the grief cycle can also apply to relationships. Before we dive into that, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
We had our spring seasonal session on Sunday.
Yeah, a quarterly planning session.
Try and say that 3 times real fast. Tongue twister.
Sort of it.
Yeah, if you've been listening to the show for a little while, you've probably heard us talk about this idea of the fueled up life, fueled up relationship. And for Nathan and I, one of the pillars that we keep our relationship fueled up is by checking in at the change of season. So 4 times a year, making the time to get realigned on our focus, what's going on, close any open loops if we've had like lingering conversations that need decisions. Yeah, and recommit to some goals to finish out the year. So we did that on Sunday. Yeah, and it was really good. It fueled me up because I really do feel like way more on the same page.
Yeah, I think we've got so much more clarity. And so we did set our big 21 goals for 2021 back in December.
November.
End of November, yeah.
And for our annual game plan, so right at the beginning of summer.
Yeah, we did. So it was just really good to reconnect with some of those goals too, because I think we just kind of lost where some of those were at and how they were progressing and things like that. So it was good to check in with them, see some of the progress that we've made, and then also just checking with some of those that have kind of slipped through the cracks and dropped off the radar and kind of reconnected why we actually wanted to do those things in the first place.
Yeah, because in the last 90 days, so between Sunday's seasonal session and the like change of autumn to winter, winter to spring, so that last like winter season, we spent out of the 90 days probably like 2/3 of it in lockdown.
Yeah.
So it really did feel like we'd lost like a lot of momentum.
Yeah, it did feel like we had lost a lot of momentum. But yeah, I think with the change of season, it's just time to kind of reinvigorate our life. And I think the other good thing too was that like one of the things we've been struggling with at the moment is not having something in the future to look forward to, really. And that lack of clarity about what the future looks like and things like that. So having our 21 goals for 2021 that we are aiming to achieve by the end of the year, it's kind of given a bit of renewed focus, and there is actually something there at the end that we're going to achieve, something to look forward to. And I guess it just gave us an opportunity too to like see what other things we want to do for the quarter, whether that is to try and get away before the end of the year if we can, and just put a little bit of fuel back into our relationship and our life.
Yeah, so if you want to take a look at any of the resources and things that Nathan and I sort of talk about on the show or in our Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, head over to fuelcollective.com.au/freebies. A lot of stuff we just make available for you to use and grab, like agendas and checklists and all that kind of good stuff. So yeah, head on over there. The one that you're probably looking for would be fuelcollective.com.au/recipe.
Yeah.
So, but Nath was, shameless little self-plug there. Nath, was that your fuel up too? Or was there something else?
No, that definitely was my fuel up, but we also did have a really fun date on Saturday night. With another hot dub session, this time rave themed, but yeah, just had a really nice platter and had a bit of a fun dance, which was nice.
Yeah, and we got dressed up.
Yeah, that adds to the enjoyment or adds to the experience. But now here's this week's guest.
Today we've got Siobhan Mullins joining us. Siobhan is a multi-award-winning, collaboratively trained family lawyer. She's a best-selling author and founder of Australia's leading award-winning family law firm, Separate Together. Siobhan and her team make the complexity and anxiety of separating simple and easy so that couples can achieve the very best outcomes for them and their family. Although she's never been married or divorced, at 31, Siobhan has insights into what seems to make and break relationships in the modern times we're living in. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sammy and Nathan, for having me. Thrilled to be here.
No worries. So can you tell us a little bit about your own story? Like, what was your journey to becoming a family lawyer?
So, okay, it tracks back a little bit to when I was a kid, maybe. So growing up, was never that popular kid at school. Always wanted to be a teacher because I loved education and kids, but I was always different. Mum called it unique. And then growing up, I went through a traumatic event. I was like, I really want to help people. So I started studying social work at uni, and then I moved into social science. And then someone said to me, you're really pedantic and OCD, you should do law. And so then I started studying law, and I got my first job at a law firm working in family law, and my uncle's a family law barrister. And I just basically went on to discover this is kind of the sweet spot of, helping people in a unique and different way by educating them about the process to separate and, achieve the very best outcomes. So that's kind of the backstory of how I got to being a family lawyer, I suppose.
Yeah. So we mentioned in your bio that you're a published author. Tell us a little bit about your book.
So a few years ago, I wrote a book called Splitting Up Together, the how-to handbook for an amicable divorce, amicable being an acronym to describe the method that I've put together to basically break down the steps of what needs to happen for a couple to separate, reach an agreement and make it all official in a way that's simple and easy without lawyers and horrid conflict, that sort of stuff.
So really you're trying to put yourself out of a job?
Yeah, make myself redundant. Here's hoping. No.
So when couples have come to see you, I'm making the assumption that there's been a bit of conflict and they've at a point where they feel like it's unresolvable and they want to go their own separate ways. So tell us a little bit about what are the kind of conflicts that you see? What are the things that people are experiencing when they reach you?
I think by the time that people come to us, they're at the point where they're either exhausted with trying because they've just drifted so far apart in their relationship. They've been together for sort of that 10, 15, 20-year mark. So, there's that drifting apart, or there's this big disconnect in terms of their values that they've discovered. And they're like, I'm just not happy with what I thought this relationship was going to be. Because there are certainly kind of trends as to when people are separating. And they're probably the two biggest things, the misalignment of values and what they think a relationship is supposed to be. And then there's certainly that drifting apart after, having been together for a long time.
Okay. So you mentioned some trends. What are the danger zones? When a couple is most likely to be experiencing these kind of things where they might be Googling divorce lawyer?
So I'll start backwards. So there's silver splitters, those who are sort of 55 and over, and they're, soon to retire, and they've been together for that 20, 30-year mark, and they've got adult kids, and they've just looked at one another and said, I don't know that I want to be retired with you day in, day out. The next level down is probably the biggest sort of bracket, which is that of people aged between kind of 35 to late 40s, and they've got kids. And they're the ones where they've had kids a little bit later on in life. They've been together maybe 8 to 15, 12 sort of years. So that's the biggest, I suppose, demographic that I'm finding people are separating at. And then the step down is what I call the career couple. So the couple who got together early 20s, they've been together for that 8 to 10, 12-year mark, no kids, and they've drifted apart. And then you've got what I call the Cupid couple. So the ones who, early 20s, and they've bought their first unit together. And then after 3 years, they discover, I don't think this is going to work. So there are really, I suppose, four big trends. But generally, the parents with the kids, it's when the kids are of school age. And I'm just seeing that age increasingly reduce in terms of little ones, the younger ones.
So what do you believe makes or breaks relationships?
I suppose that it's something that triangles, so that trust, the communication and the respect. And it's without all three of those things that relationships break down. But importantly, I think underpinning that kind of foundational aspect is that of core alignment values. Your value systems about money and or the importance of family and, work ethic, those sort of and career aspirations and what you want out of life. I think they're real things that can make or break relationships if they're not in place.
Yeah, those are good ones, aren't they? Those really are pillars, because I think if there's fractured or broken trust, or fractured or broken respect or fractured or broken communication, those are really tangible things that you can go and work on. They're not like one and done kind of things. They can take a few punches, but not to the point where they're, in our world, we would say that the tank is empty or that the fuel is totally depleted, but they can't, those are things that can be replenished.
Yes, because they all existed there at one point in time, you would think. When you got together, you had those beliefs or those feelings about the other person.
So because of the nature of lawyer that you are, and that you are shooting for the amicable separation as opposed to the I'm going to take you for all your worth separation, how can we encourage couples to deal with conflict in an amicable and proactive kind of way?
I think with any relationship, whether it's, friends, your workmates, whatever, or even your partner, there's going to be inevitable conflict. And I think from my perspective, the first thing is to get comfortable with it, because it's only through having that sort of conflict and facing those challenges and adversity that you actually come to better understand your partner and work backwards to say, okay, you're feeling that way. So what is it that you need to hear from me in order for us to move forward on this? So I think one thing is to get comfortable with conflict. And I don't know if listeners are familiar with the John Gottman Institute and the Four Horsemen. So, that's that of, contempt, criticism, defensiveness, and stonewalling. So any of that sort of behaviour, because I see it from time to time with couples, and I do tell them to pull their head in. I just say, look, it's not on. I'm here to create a safe space, that's not acceptable. So I think how we can get better at managing conflict is to that of get comfortable with it and recognise behaviours, and otherwise, stop doing it. But even when my partner and I, we have like issues or things that we're not jiving on, and we'll say, look, I need a moment, and we'll walk away. But the promise is that we'll come back, that we'll talk about it when we're both in a better headspace. And it's definitely not a heated conversation. I always say to people, the name calling isn't on. It sounds so basic, but on the passive aggressive digs. So I think those would be perhaps the two big takeaways in terms of get comfortable with conflict, and that of don't display those sort of behaviours, the contempt, the defensiveness, the stonewalling, and the criticism.
And I think conflict is something that you can practice as well. So like, I guess it's not necessarily conflict, but one of the things that we do normally on a Sunday is we'll have a bit of a debrief of our week and things like that. But one of the questions that we ask each other is like, what's something you would like me to apologize for? And I think just that question in itself invites the controlled level of conflict, if that makes sense, because you're inviting it on yourself and using it as an opportunity to learn. But I think, it was pretty uncomfortable to begin with when we first started doing it.
Yeah.
But as we've done it more often, you build that level of trust between the two of you, and I think it makes not only that one question, but a whole heap of conflict a lot more bearable and a lot easier to handle.
Because you're creating that safe space and that trust of, I know you're not going to abuse this by me giving you permission, and it's being reciprocated. And that is such a level of respect and integrity, and certainly, the importance of communication.
Yeah. And one of the other great things about that is the cadence of the conversation. So because we try our very best to do it weekly, and we hit it most of the time. Yeah. But there's things that don't escalate. Like there's not this thing where you've like stashed all these tiny little things that in isolation don't really warrant a big, confrontational type discussion, but you're able to almost like let air out of the balloon when it's like water balloon sized, not when it's about to explode. Yeah. So I found that for us, that avoids it exploding, but it also avoids any resentment of these like small little things that can become not such small things.
And that you may not have addressed at the time.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's that thing of like sitting and digesting. I'll go away from a conversation sometimes and think, that kind of didn't sit well with me. Why didn't it? What would I like to have happened? And what do I need from that person, if anything? Yeah, so that permission conversation later on, I might steal that.
It's also just such a great script too, because if I know that if there's animosity or there's an energy or there's something sitting between Nath or I, it can be a really great like language to be like, hey, everything doesn't quite feel right. Is there something you want me to apologize for? And it's not, I guess it's that opportunity to shine light on the thing that I might not have even known that I was upset about until I was offered the opportunity to reflect and be like, well, why am I being a bitch? What am I actually upset about here?
But it's also good because you're labeling, you're identifying a feeling, right, as well, without accusing someone of doing something or, you know, being or behaving a particular way. So, yeah, I love to use the word energy because it's so spot on. You can read your partner's vibe and everything.
So you gave us a couple of the no-nos of conflict using John and Julie's framework, which we love. But what are the yeses of conflict? What should we be doing?
So for me, the yeses in conflict is that of making those repair attempts, whether it's coming in closer proximity to your partner, doing the physical touch, and also being that of, you know, humble to say, hey, look, I understand I stuffed up. You know, I appreciate that you're feeling this particular way. I acknowledge that. I perhaps could have handled that better. So that humbling, being humble and acknowledging certainly your partner's feelings, but then what you could have done or will do differently going forward. And I think a yes in conflict is certainly that of body language. You know, if you stand there with your arms all up and you're 2 meters apart and, you know, it mightn't be the best thing to go up and like hug one another necessarily, but to come and stand in closer proximity, to use, you know, your hands to gesticulate, it really shows vulnerability as well, especially when someone goes physically to make that repair attempt. And it means the world to me when my partner and I have had like a conversation and I've been hurt, but then he comes up to me and it's just that touch, that reassurance. And sometimes it can speak, you know, volumes, you know, rather than words. So I suppose they're sort of the big ticket items for me in terms of what are the yeses in managing conflict.
One of the things that you mentioned in there I really like around like where your eye level is with your partner and whether or not you're looking at each other or you're, you know, yelling at each other from another room. I think it's Stan Tatkin talks about this idea of our brains being ancient. The operating system for our brain is ancient, cavewoman, caveman style, and we're no longer living in the world of saber-toothed tigers. But yet we still are triggered when people are in the peripheral of our eyesight. And that one of the worst times that you can have conflict is when you're driving in the car with your partner because you can't look at each other and you're both sitting in the peripheral, like the outside edges of your vision for both of you. And it triggers this fight or flight. And most likely I need to protect myself. I'm not safe, which I find really interesting, but it's such a small thing that if you make a conscious effort to be looking at your partner while you're having those conversations, it can totally diffuse the energy in yourself and them.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Yeah. And if you're sitting side by side, you're together as one team facing one problem. Like you're both looking at the same thing. So, yeah, that close proximity and that eye contact is just so important. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
I think the physical touch as well is definitely something. Like it doesn't need to be like a hug or an embrace or something. It can just literally be like a touch, like touching someone on the shoulder or something like that. And it does really help to make conflict feel like you're in it together and that it is the two of you and it's not two individuals, but you're actually up against the problem together.
I think that's really interesting that you brought that up too, Nath, because I know that your primary love language being physical touch, that's also the absence of touch is not just neutral, but it's actually a negative. It actually causes harm by being without, especially in those like more tense moments, I guess. But yeah, I also think like the body language thing or the physical touch around like the closure and putting a bookend on the conflict. Like, because sometimes people will be like, do you know what? Grab the keys and walk out. I'm just going to take 10 minutes or whatever it might be. And then you come back and there's kind of been like this open loop. Or if you've had a conversation like maybe while you were out at dinner, but it wasn't the moment to have the full conversation. But being mindful about how you leave that. Like you want to put the cork back in the bottle or I don't know, that's not probably not the best example, but a best analogy. But yeah, I think being mindful of like, all right, let's kiss and make up and tie a bow in this. Like let's actually kiss. So
love it.
So Siobhan, if couples have come to you and they're like, we're thinking about separating, there's really kind of like two paths, right? They either go back and they work on their relationship and they reconcile and they get it to a place where they're both happy to stay with each other and hopefully continue what would be a thriving relationship, or they do go down the separation and divorce route, what should couples do before they make that decision to separate?
So from my perspective and experience, I think the first thing to do is check in with your headspace, because you can have so much going on with work, with family, with home, with friends, and your own relationship with your partner, that it's very easy for us to perhaps attribute a problem to the person closest to us, which mightn't be the issue. I've seen relationships break down and then, 6, 12 months later, the person has said to me, I wish I hadn't. There's so much regret. And the men who I've spoken to, because I've spoken with guys one-on-one to say, look, talk to me about the experience and do you have any regrets or what advice would you give? And they've all said, make sure that you're really damn sure, because there's no real coming back because you've just broken so much trust. So from my perspective, first thing is get clear in your headspace. What on earth is going on in my little world that is making me feel this way? The second thing is that of what do I feel that I need right now? And then unpacking that further to go, am I in a position where I can satisfy my own needs, or do I need to look to someone else, my partner or, friend or, a creative outlet to satisfy that need? To then be in a position to effectively communicate that to your partner if you're needing something from them and you're not receiving it. So giving somebody, your partner, the decency and the opportunity to fulfill that need. It's so easy for us to go, here's a problem, I'm unhappy, I'm bored with the relationship, or it's not what I thought it was going to be. Remember when we first started dating, it was so much fun and, you need to pull your socks up. Like, oh, okay, what does that look like though? What do you actually need? And is that the root cause? Would us going bowling of a weekend really satisfy and tick that box of you feeling fulfilled in this relationship? And probably the answer is going to be no. There's more to it. So I think doing that critical thinking and dedicating the time and devoting, giving yourself permission and that opportunity to self-reflect is really important. Otherwise, you then drop like a seed of, hey, I'm thinking about separating, this isn't working for me. And your partner might be completely blindsided. And you've also got to think of the grief cycle as well when it comes to relationship breakdown. So, because once you put it out there, unless you're clear in terms of what you need, it can just take on a life of its own that you mightn't actually intend for.
I really like that. Yeah, that thought of internalizing it before and like actually doing that self-reflection before making a decision. Because we had someone on the show recently where her partner went to rehab, and yeah, they were having lots of conflict leading up to this. And what she realized when he went to rehab was that all the same shit was going on while she was there by herself, and that it wasn't actually her partner's doing necessarily that was the cause of the problem. And so luckily enough in this situation, they didn't divorce or didn't separate. He went and did his stint in rehab, and they managed to rekindle afterwards. But yeah, it was a real example, I guess, of those people going their own separate ways, realizing they've still got their own shit and the same stuff still showing up, and that it was actually work that they needed to do themselves rather than the partner.
Yeah, I believe that so much. And we talk about this at Fuel Collective, that the relationship with yourself sets the tone for every other relationship that you have. Mm-hmm. And if there's something going on in your own world and your own turmoil, you can't outsource that to your partner. That's yours. That's your responsibility. So I really like that you shared that. There was something that you said in there that I want to jump back to, was the grief cycle of a relationship. Tell us a little bit about that.
So the grief cycle, it's like that of, death when somebody passes away. There are generally 5 stages. So the first one being that of denial, oh, this isn't happening, it's all fine one day and, we'll be able to get through this, there's no issues. Then there's that of anger. I'm angry with my partner. They're not doing this. And in part, that anger is fueled by your dissatisfaction or unhappiness with life or generally, within yourself. There is that bargaining. Oh, if he was able to do this, if she could do that, or maybe if so there's that sort of not necessarily a genuine attempt to repair, but a bargaining sort of relationship. Then there's that of depression, like, no, this is never going to get any better. I just can't believe it. I'm very depressed. You're internalizing. And then finally through to acceptance. So no, this is actually a decision I need to make for myself or, the family. And so I see people step through that. And importantly, when I've worked with people one-on-one, I ask a lot of questions about their partner. So I say, okay, whose decision was it to separate? Because when they're in a different headspace, if you force someone to try and move past or progress in the grief cycle before they're ready, you're just going to be met with resistance, distrust, stubbornness. They're just going to stick their head in the sand. And that's where you see a lot of conflict actually arise. And because then the person who has already made the decision to leave or, wants to progress things, they then go see a lawyer. That lawyer says, righto, we'll write a letter to your partner. And then your partner's bombarded with legal letters from lawyers. And there's huge disconnect between the realization that, yes, okay, there's a legal formal process, but this is an emotional, this is life-changing, this is somebody's relationship. And nobody actually wants to go through it. So there's all this turmoil. So that's what I mean about the grief cycle in that instance. It's so important for people to recognise where they're at as well as their partners.
So my assumption is that people can start moving through that grief cycle maybe even before they've communicated to their partner that they want out.
100%. And even like writing might have been on the wall for donkey's years that this is heading for a separation. But when somebody calls it, the other person can still feel blindsided. And, that's because they're in that denial sort of phase there.
So we're here on a podcast about relationships where hopefully if people are continuing to have the willingness to refuel their relationships and they're continuing to get the resources that they need to solve the problems that they're coming up against or the opportunities they're coming up against, what do the couples who go the other path and they decide to stick it out and have another go, what are they doing?
Well, they're certainly with now a view and a feel for this is what life could look like if we actually separated financially and otherwise. Do we really want to go down there? And that's deterring them to then work together. So I think there's more of an emotional check-in between them to say, look, we're actually both committed. We don't want that. We don't want that sort of life.
That sounds bloody awful.
For the kids. Yeah. Even if you're amicable, right?
Yeah.
Because you see in real dollars and terms, oh God, I'm really going to struggle financially and so forth. Not that that's a reason to necessarily stay in the relationship, but you see couples check in with one another more. The other thing that I see people do is go to counselling. And it's interesting, people will sometimes go to counselling. And I've heard one psych say to me, couples counselling is just for, is about giving the person who wants to be there permission to leave the relationship, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
So have you heard that before?
Yeah, I've heard that because, I've seen a really good friend do that with their relationship and they were already, now that I have the language, they were already quite the way through that grief cycle before they went to counselling. And them going to counselling was like almost giving them a gold star to be like, well, I tried. I went to counselling. We went to counselling. Whereas they didn't going versus actually showing up and really investing in choosing that path versus the other path. Yeah, I've definitely seen a friend go through that experience.
I think they're the two things from my experience that I see people do and hear of people doing. And they've actually none of them have come back. So they're still together. God willing. Which I figure is like a pretty cheap experience of a separation or a possible separation divorce, right?
So yet another way you're trying to write yourself out of a job.
Yeah. Here's hoping.
And Siobhan, if Nathan and I are really successful, we will also be writing you out of a job.
Oh, good.
So, yeah, I really like what you talked about here because I think having proximity and experience with couples who have hit that point where they just feel like they can't figure it out or they don't want to. They don't want to figure it out. But I guess the idea for Fuel Collective is about not letting the car break down, about continually adding fuel to the tank as we move through this journey so that we don't get to having our first couple of kids in at school and then we go, do you know what, I've had enough of this. Like we want to be checking in with the relationship regularly and having those conversations regularly and adding fuel to the various tanks. I thought it was really interesting what you were saying before about like taking an analytical look of the relationship and, having a few more dates actually fix it? Or is there something bigger going on? Do you actually need to have a deeper conversation about the future or about how your family and network are fitting into the relationship? Or is it the career and businesses that you're currently in are not serving the relationship? And that's what's putting pressure. So I really like that. Yeah, that taking a helicopter view of what's really going on, not just in you and your body and your relationship with yourself and your romantic relationship, but the big, big picture. So thank you for sharing that. You mentioned a couple of times that you've got a partner of your own. We also mentioned the bio, not yet married. So does being a divorce lawyer, does that put a dampener on getting married?
Oh, God. It's made it harder dating. But
Yeah.
I think, no, actually, like if I ever get married, and I do want to because I do believe in it, I'm excited for that prospect. And I feel I've learned so much through the couples and people who I've worked with to really recognize, okay, what are kind of the pitfalls that these couples have fallen into, and what can my partner and I do to minimize the risk of that happening. So, he's actually up in Sydney and I'm down here in Canberra. So we're really
stuck
solidifying.
apart at the moment.
Yeah, good old COVID. So, no, we're really solidifying. It's good, the foundational friendship thing, because that's it at the end of the day. My mum always said, like, I really shouldn't say this, but she's like, you're not going to be bonking when you're like 80 or 90, looks fade, and you want to get along with the person who you're with, which is just so true. And I think that core alignment is really important. So yeah, we check in with one another every day too. Yeah. On the phone it's a bit difficult, but it's worth it. Yeah.
So even with the distance separating you, what do the two of you do to actively continue dating each other?
What do we do? Oh, so we'll do little voice messages during the day. So you know how you can just use your iPhone? So he'll tell me, like, when he's on his way to get coffee or something, and I'll tell him, if I'm annoyed that the guy parked in my spot or something, just little tiny things, but it gives your partner kind of insight into your day-to-day when, you're not seeing one another every single day. When we do get together, it's very much like we'll devote time to just us, even if it's just sitting on the couch and watching TV and, having a drink, or we'll, plan to get outdoors, all those sort of little things to look forward to that just demonstrate, the dedication and the energy to the relationship. Yeah.
I like that voice memo tip because some people are not great with the text and the written communication, and sometimes tone can get a bit lost. So I really like, attaching voice to it. I keep trying to encourage Nath to send me more memojis, like the ones that have the like random octopus or the robot or whatever, like, because they make it even better.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, is there something that you would recommend for couples to watch, read, listen, do, implement in their lives and relationships to help keep it fueled up?
Okay, so a few things. So one would be to definitely subscribe to YouTube.
Yes, thank you.
The second thing is because, I love relationships and learning and that self-exploration. So the Gottman Institute, they've got some really good quick little, 1 to 2 minute read subscriptions, which I think are brilliant. It's just a genuine kind of reminder of, I should check in on my relationship, which sometimes you forget to do, right? You just take it for granted a bit. And then I follow Esther Perel.
Oh, we adore her. We adore Esther. And her accent's great, so it makes everything she says twice as interesting.
Yes. So they're things that I would do. And then otherwise, I suppose, just the playfulness, right? Doing the whole alphabet dating thing, or thinking, like, I'll hide my partner's, if he gets stuff mailed here, I'll hide it around the house and we have to play hot and cold.
Oh, I love that. That's really cute.
It just, because otherwise things can just, it cracks me up. He's very serious, but, it's just that, opportunity to laugh and, inviting that in, I think.
Go back. What was the alphabet dating thing? What's that?
Oh, so that's where you have to, so you follow the alphabet. So I'll pick a date that starts with A. So we'll go to the Arboretum. He used to pick one with B. It's go on a broad
basketball.
burger. Yeah.
Okay, I love this. That's really cute.
So, yeah, it's a bit cute. And it means that you've both got to put in energy and time and effort and take the initiative to do it. Because you hear sometimes a lot of people sort of, oh, it's always me planning and I'm sick of it. And it would mean a lot if they did take the initiative to do this. And yeah, it gives everybody that opportunity.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that. That's really cute. And that's super simple. It's a super simple framework that takes it from, well, it was my letter last time, so it's your letter next. When are we going on our F date?
Yeah.
Or our D date? That's great. Hey, this has been a really great conversation. Thank you for being so open and transparent with us about the not so nice part of relationships, because the reality still in Australia is that I think it's like still 50-ish% ending in divorce. So thank you for being here to share a little bit about how we might not end up in your office. But to say thank you for joining us, we've provided a student in Indonesia with a week of classroom education. This project's looked after by Friends of National Parks Foundation, and the project particularly focuses on education of girls, which then has an incredible ripple effect for their whole life. So thank you so much for making that possible.
Oh, thank you both. That's an incredible way of paying it forward. So thank you.
Yeah.
So, Siobhan, if people want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about what you do, hopefully they don't, but if they do want to connect, how should they do that?
I think not necessarily for them, but for anybody they know who might be separating or thinking about it. We've got this thing called the Amicable Separation Quiz, and it's in under 7 questions, so it takes like 1 minute, if that. It gives you your personalised next steps roadmaps in terms of, some suggested ideas about things that will help you in your decision or to move forward in a way that's positive and actually constructive and not destructive to your relationship. So I think that's a good, gentle starting point, if anybody actually needs information on, the separation process.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for that.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting too, because what I've observed when we've watched friends go through breakups and sometimes divorce, it's been the inaction, like the choosing to stay in pain before they make a decision, like whether or not that's that we're staying in this and we're going to have a really proactive go at improving it, or we're going to make the decision to get out. It's almost that inaction and that like lack of decision, which in itself is a decision that creates more pain. So I think that's a really great tool. Thank you for sharing it. Before we wrap, is there a last top tip? Is there something that you would love to share that you didn't get the chance to share?
I have a little saying which I kind of live by. You want to marry the person who you can imagine being divorced from. And I know that sounds a bit contradictory, but if you can imagine seeing your partner at their worst before you've married, then imagine what they'll be like if, in the unfortunate event you were to separate, what they could behave and be like, because it really is such an emotional, stressful time. And, you want to see your partner at their worst so you know sort of what you're getting into, but also how you can manage that and all that. So that'd be my little
I like
little
that.
insight.
Because I've heard people say, like, if you saw the highlights reel to your relationship before you entered it, would you still go on the first date? But you've kind of flipped it and said, well, like, if you saw the low lights, if you saw the shitty bits, would you still choose it?
Yeah.
Powerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy. And thank you both for sharing with me.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.